Hello, and welcome to episode 113 of the Inside Knowledge podcast for people with IBS. I'm Anna Mapson. I'm a registered nutritional therapist, and I work with people who have ongoing uncontrolled bloating, diarrhea, constipation, abdominal pain, gas, reflux, all of those kind of things. That is what we talk about here on this podcast. Today, I want to go through a lot about histamine and histamine intolerance, histamine overload, whatever we're going to call it, and really think about what that looks like for you if you have uncontrolled gut symptoms. How would you know if histamine is driving them and what you can do about it? I will also cover a little bit about histamine diets and whether they are effective, what you should avoid if you want to go on a low histamine diet and what that looks like, and a little bit about supplements as well. So this is an area where I see a huge amount of wild claims on social media about how to manage histamine. People saying that it's linked to past trauma, to mold overgrowth, that it's linked to viruses in your liver, like all kinds of things that frankly aren't based on that much evidence. Because histamine intolerance has so many symptoms, really systemic symptoms, that it's hard to put your finger on it. I think it's quite misunderstood and quite easy for people to kind of run with it on social media with some kind of crazy myths. So if we think about what histamine is, it's a biogenic amine is the proper term for it, but it's something your immune system makes when it comes into contact with an allergen. So personally, I am one of those people who get very itchy eyes, itchy nose, and sneezy, a bit like tight-chested, wheezy if I spend too much time with cats or if I go somewhere very dusty. So histamine is part of our body's natural response to allergens. And what it does in the body is it can tighten some smooth muscles. So the smooth muscles are things that we don't have under our own control. Like we can't think to move our gut forward. We can't consciously tighten our airways, all right? But histamine can do those things. So when your body senses that you've come into contact with some allergen, your bronchial tubes, like your airways, can tighten, and that's where you can get a bit wheezy. You may find that your gut gets crampy as well. So I'll come on to a whole list of digestive symptoms, but essentially, like, histamine can control the speed of things moving through the gut. Histamine can also vasodilate, so it means it can relax some of our cardiovascular veins and arteries. So you may find that you get palpitations, changes in your heartbeat. You may find that even when you're sitting down, you get like a fluttery chest. In addition to all those sort of symptoms that I've mentioned, you can also get a lot of other symptoms, like, for example, insomnia. Changes in your sleep patterns can definitely be controlled by histamine. You may find skin rashes, like itching skin, urticaria, eczema, the runny nose, itchy skin, like sneezing. You may also find headaches. And so then with the digestion, the symptoms are very similar to IBS. So you can either have loose stools, diarrhea, or constipation, bloating, a feeling of fullness quite quickly. So post-meal early satiety, that means you feel full quite quickly. Abdominal pains, gas, excessive farting, burping, and nausea. So really, really similar symptoms to your average IBS person. And this is why it's so tricky to pin down. It's difficult to diagnose, and we don't have a really good biomarker or test to say, yes, you are intolerant to histamine. Now, I want to come on to the term, actually, histamine intolerance, because it's not like an intolerance in the same way that you would have lactose intolerance. All right. So with lactose intolerance, you have some dairy, high levels of sugar, lactose in there that your body needs lactase to break down. With histamine, we do have some enzymes, two enzymes that break down histamine that can both have issues with their production. However, There's no clear test to show this, really. And because we need some histamine in our body, like obviously we don't want to eradicate all of it. It's not like we want to get rid of all histamine because it has got a positive use in the body. It's part of our natural immune system. There are a couple of things that can increase histamine production in the body. And then there are also some things that can affect the clearance of it. Some of the ways I like to describe histamine to clients is thinking about a bucket of water that's drip, drip, drip. Water's going into the bucket. When it's full, it overflows. Now, we need to empty this bucket at times, which is part of the clearance process. We need our body to be able to release the histamine, break it down, get rid of it. Now, if your bucket is very full and then you're adding in more histamine production, it's going to overflow, and that's when it triggers some of those symptoms, whether they are specifically in the gut or whether they are more systemic symptoms such as palpitations or itching or insomnia. So what are the things that cause you to produce histamine? I'll go through those first. Then I'll talk about how we clear histamine, and then we'll come on to diet and how that affects your histamine levels. Let's go through a couple of things that make histamine. One of the key triggers for producing histamine in women is high levels of estrogen. Estrogen encourages our mast cells to release histamine. So at times when estrogen is peaking, so for example around ovulation, you may find you get a sudden spike in either digestive symptoms, or you may find that you get more itchy, waking up with scratchy throat, sneezing, rubbing your eyes constantly. Now, there can be other causes of this, but you may see a pattern in it. So estrogen for women is 100% a trigger for histamine issues. Now, you may also find your immune system is overreacting, producing too much in response to allergens. So like we said, with dust, pet fur, it could also be medication, which suppresses the production of the enzyme, which breaks it down, which I'm going to come on to in a second, or increases the production of histamine. So you can get this with some antibiotics, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen, that can also affect histamine. And there are other things as well that can upset the balance of histamine in the gut. So medication can definitely be part of it. Now, the other thing that people don't always think about that can produce histamine is your gut microbes. So there are some particular strains of gut bacteria which are known to secrete histamine. They break down histidine or other amino acids from your diet, and they use that to produce histamine themselves. Now, this might only be a very small proportion, but sometimes people find that when they sort their diet out, they sort their overall gut health out, that these allergy symptoms are reducing. Some people with histamine intolerance have been found to have a lower proportion of good, helpful gut bacteria, specifically some strains like Rheumatococcus, Faecalibacterium prausnitzii. Like these are known to be helpful and reduce histamine, but they also have higher levels of bacteria that are known to produce histamine. So some bacteria will take amino acids from your diet, such as histidine, and use it to create histamine. So these particular bacteria might be Proteus or Staphylococcus and like a whole range of others. So some specific bacteria that we know. And then this can also happen with probiotics as well, which is why you can get special strains of probiotics that do not include these bacteria that we know increase histamine production. So that's how we create histamine. It can be down to triggers in the body, such as estrogen. It can be down to your immune system overreacting to allergens in your environment. It can be down to gut bacteria. It can be down to medication, which is either reducing the enzymes that break it down or that are encouraging production of histamine. So that's how we create histamine in our body. Then the way that we break histamine down, the two ways we clear the bucket, empty the bucket and try and reduce histamine overload, there are two enzymes. Firstly, we have the enzyme diamine oxidase. It's in your small intestine. It's bubbling around in between your cells, in the tissues. finding histamine and breaking it down. It's stopping it getting absorbed into the blood and getting into your cells. Now, there's another enzyme which sort of mops up excess histamine, which is within the cells, and that is histamine N-methyltransferase, HMNT, and that is within the cell. So that's like the second line defense. The first one, though, the DAO, that is the enzyme that is the first line of kind of breaking down your histamine. Now, the production of DAO can be reduced when you have damage or things that are interfering in the small intestine with your normal digestive processes. So here I'm thinking about SIBO, small intestine bacterial overgrowth, thinking about IBD, uncontrolled celiac disease if you're eating gluten. These are going to have issues that are going to damage the production of the DAO enzyme, or just interfere with your body's natural digestive processes. All right, so it's always really important to carry on looking for the cause that you can then identify a solution. So whether it's, okay, I've got celiac disease, I need to go gluten-free, or I've got SIBO, I need to treat it. I've got IBD, I need medication to control the inflammation. Like, there may be this cause of the lack of production of this DAO enzyme. Now, the other thing is you may just genetically not be producing this enzyme, and this is possible. So some people just don't produce as much of this enzyme as they should and will struggle with ongoing allergy type symptoms, and be those people who just have a lot of histamine and triggering those kind of itching or gut upset symptoms. Because there are no good biomarkers for diagnosing histamine intolerance, we need to make some educated guesses, and I would try to work with a doctor in this regard, really, because to get a formal diagnosis, you do need a doctor. What you might be able to do is to think about some of these symptoms that I've mentioned, some of these risks and potential causes for histamine overload, and then think about whether they may be relevant to you. Now, there is another cause of high histamine, which I haven't yet come on to, which is food-related histamine. But this is a very small part of the histamine production in your body, or the histamine levels in your body. It's much more about what your body is doing. Is it producing too much or not clearing it? And I would say a smaller amount is down to what you eat, but we will come on to the food. So if you were thinking, well, it does really sound like me, and I think I might have a problem with histamine, then what your doctor would be thinking about in order to consider a diagnosis would be, do you have some of these digestive issues and maybe some of the systemic issues, and you've had them for over 3 months, constantly have these kind of symptoms? They're like a big part of your issues. Do you get any relief when you follow a low histamine diet? And do you get any relief when you take antihistamine medication? Now, I'm definitely not saying everybody with these symptoms should go off and take antihistamine medication. This is why a conversation with a doctor is really important. But we know that histamine can be controlled through antihistamines. Like, there are a lot on the market, but we don't want to take them unnecessarily because they're still a medication, right? Before you even get on to thinking about cutting high histamine foods from your diet, I would advise you get some of the basics sorted. So you are focusing on getting some exercise regularly. You are doing some calming work, some deep breathing. You are thinking about your overall diet, like you're trying to make sure you've got a balanced diet with sufficient protein, fiber, and fats. Then you also, are prioritizing sleep. You're trying to allow time for sleep. All of those things, kind of basics, get them sorted first, right? Don't leap to cutting more foods from your diet. Then you could potentially try taking antihistamines every day for a short time, like a week. And if this reduces your symptoms, then that is a sign that maybe histamine is involved, and you should almost certainly be going back to your doctor to let them know that you've done this and your gut symptoms have improved. Right, this is the difference between histamine overload and IBS. In IBS, taking antihistamines wouldn't make much difference. Let's think about what some of the foods are. Now, finding a list of high histamine foods is incredibly difficult. It's really hard. I have been working on this for years and trying to get a really good, solid list of reliable information. There are loads of lists out there on the internet. Don't get me wrong. You can find a lot of information, but finding it that's been evidenced and researched and actually proven to be in these foods in multiple studies is almost impossible. So some foods contain histamine and some foods may release histamine in your body. There are other things that are very, very similar to histamine, especially in high protein foods like meats and cheeses. Other amines are tyramine, putrescine, and cadaverine, which can also be found in foods that contain histamine. So there's quite an overlap. I guess what I'm saying is there's other things that are a bit like histamine that are included that we need to think about. So if you're looking to go on a low histamine diet, what you want to think about is foods that are aged, fermented, processed, because histamine increases in food as it ages. This is why some people will find they get on well with a meal. Maybe they have like a chili and then they put it in the fridge, and then 3 days later they think, oh yeah, I had that chili last Tuesday, get it out, and then suddenly you get symptoms, and it might be because it's had higher histamine levels. So to follow a low histamine diet, we're going to reduce high histamine foods. We're going to limit foods that may liberate histamine for a very short amount of time, and then really focusing on fresh foods, lots of high, good nutrient-dense foods. The highest histamine-containing foods are aged cheeses like cheddar, the really tasty, mature stuff. Obviously, cheeses with mold in it, like blue cheese, and parmesan, and also cured meats like salami, parma ham. These are high histamine meats. Tinned fish like tuna, sardines, mackerel, and then also fish that's been caught and then not eaten for a long time. And then other things that are high histamine are fermented foods. So sauerkraut, kimchi, those kind of things, yogurt to some extent as well, and alcohol, also fermented, right? Now, there's a list of foods that may contain a bit of histamine, the vegetables, but I tend to not worry about these as much. Really focus on the meats, the cheeses, alcohol, fermented foods. That is your number one goal. Secondly, there are some vegetables and things that may contain some levels of histamine, but the evidence is a little bit dodgy, I would say. So, and it's varied, right? So depending on the portion sizing, depending on how ripe the food is, there's so many factors. But what we're talking about is tomatoes, spinach, aubergine, eggplant if you're in America, nuts as well. Those potentially could have histamine in them as well. And then mostly other foods are free. You don't have to worry. So it's not like the FODMAP diet. But we're also thinking about your overall portions again. So it's thinking about histamine producing factors, trying to reduce them all, and then going back to the diet, cutting out those high histamine foods. Now, other things that could trigger the release of histamine, definitely you need to be 100% alcohol free. So no drinking while you're doing this low histamine diet. Otherwise, it's kind of messing things up because alcohol competes with the enzymes that break them down. So when you've been drinking, your body can't process clearing the alcohol dehydrogenase, and the histamine. So you need to cut alcohol out for a while. Caffeine as well might trigger histamine production. And I would be careful about taking some probiotics as well, that they can potentially produce histamine. So we need to be careful about those. Now, if you don't feel any better after going on a low histamine diet, then histamine foods are not your issue. And it's the same with the low FODMAP diet, right? We don't go on this forever and then never test it again. we go on this diet to see if you feel better. And if you do, then I'm going to talk about how you do this reintroduction, because it's not the same as the low FODMAP diet. It's not testing one food and noticing if you get a change. We need to go back to this bucket theory and look at, are you eating too much of these foods and triggering the overload symptoms? So instead of increasing the high histamine foods one by one and testing out whether, can I eat mackerel, what you need to do is to try a little bit of all of those things and see where your tolerance lies. So it may be that you start off with some salami and you have a little bit and see how you feel. If that feels okay, then you have salami and something else like some cheddar as alongside it. Okay. So you're building up your high histamine foods alongside maybe reintroducing alcohol, maybe reintroducing caffeine, and seeing what your symptoms are as you go back to a higher histamine diet. But the other thing you can do is to test out taking the enzyme DAO supplementally. So you can take an enzyme which helps you break down histamine with each meal. Again, if this doesn't improve your symptoms, you do not need to carry on taking this enzyme long term. And even if it does help you, you should be thinking, well, why am I producing too much histamine? Is it because my hormones? Is it something to do with estrogen and I need to work on estrogen clearance? Is it because I don't have enough of the ingredients that make this enzyme? To make DAO, you need some cofactors. You need the ingredients to make it. That's copper, which is found in mushrooms, shellfish, meats, nuts and seeds, whole grains. If you haven't been eating any of those for a long time, you might be low in copper. Also, if you've been taking zinc for a really long time, it can interfere with copper absorption. So you may need to stop supplementing with zinc, and you shouldn't be supplementing really with things like that long term anyway. But unless you are also taking copper, it can be an issue. So copper, really important for the production of DAO. For example, you also need B6, you need vitamin C, and these are just widely found. So what I find as well is that a lot of people who've had so many issues, if you've got to the stage where you're considering histamine intolerance, you've probably already gone through a low FODMAP diet. You've probably gone gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free, caffeine-free. Like, you've already cut so many things out. Now you're cutting out more foods. We need to be really careful that we're not reducing the good ingredients for the production of really essential enzymes, such as this DAO. The diet, like the low FODMAP diet, should only be followed for a short time so that we can assess what this reduction in high histamine foods does to your gut symptoms, to your overall systemic symptoms. It's not the first thing that I would do. But if you've got to the point where you've tried lots of other things and you haven't got anywhere, it's a potential route that's worth investigating. I would suggest you discuss it with a practitioner that you're working with or with your doctor to find out what they think about the likelihood of histamine being part of a driver of your symptoms. So we've covered a lot today. To just summarize and get back to summary of the protocol that I suggest when I'm working with someone and I think histamine might be part of the picture. Firstly, we want to try and clear the histamine bucket. So that involves trying to reduce factors that increase natural histamine production. So that might be reducing exposure to allergens if it's an immune response. It might be thinking about changing your medication. Now, obviously, I'm not suggesting anyone comes off their medication without speaking to their doctor. That's your first line. Every time, go back to your medical professional. However, there might be alternative medications that do the similar thing that maybe you can talk to them about if your particular brand of medication is known to increase histamine production or to stop the DAO enzyme. It's worth considering as a route and a conversation for you to have with your doctor. So we want to try and clear the bucket. That is the number one thing. And as part of that, you may like to try a low histamine diet for a short amount of time. Now, with any elimination diet, it's really important that you set parameters, you know exactly what you're measuring, and you know how long you are doing it for, and you understand what you're measuring. So take your symptoms at the baseline, track it, and then take it at the end of this trial period. You're doing a mini research project on yourself, and you want to make sure you get the best data, that the hassle of cutting foods out is not for nothing. So you can try a low histamine diet. You can also try taking antihistamines for a very short period of time if it's suitable for you. Some people, it will interfere with their medication or maybe other things that are going on in your body, which means it's not suitable for you. So if that's a possibility, you could try that. So you want to clear the bucket, try a low antihistamine diet, try taking a DAO enzyme for a short amount of time. The research around it, as I said before, is mixed, so I wouldn't rely on this, and this is not the only thing that you can do, but it is worth throwing into the mix. If you're going to do an antihistamine protocol, do it all and kind of go for it all at once. But be careful. What I didn't do before when I was talking about foods, which I just want to finish on, is a last point to make sure that you are clear that you don't need to cut out all meat. You don't need to remove all fish from your diet. Yes, these foods may be higher in histamine, especially when they are aged or processed. However, you can still eat fresh fish. You can still eat meat, because what I'm worried about is people who are on a low FODMAP diet and relying a lot on protein for their energy. If they now have to cut out a lot of key protein sources, you're going to be left with very little to eat. And that's where a lot of people come to me and they're already low FODMAP and then they want to go low histamine and they just don't know what to eat. They're very stuck and end up eating the same foods and it gets very boring. So if that's you and you're confused about histamine, confused about your gut symptoms, then please do get in touch. The other thing is I do have a book out that's called Inside Knowledge for People with IBS and SIBO. And there is a whole chapter dedicated to histamine overload, what to do, all the protocols written down, all the foods and the exact amounts and histamine levels are all in the paper copy, so you can have something in your hand that explains all of this stuff and goes through it in a lot more detail than I've been able to in this short episode today. But I'm going to leave it there. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Inside Knowledge. Better digestion for everyone.